Thank you, Atul. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Firstly, again, apologies for any confusion on time zones, etc. I'm glad we're up and running. Very, very excited and very honored to be here. Thank you. The more I hear about Mr. Narayanan, I wish I had known him better. I have heard about him, and just FYI, while I've spent more than 30 years at McKinsey, the only other institution that I did spend a summer at was Hindustan Lever, where I spent a few months, and then like you said, for good or for worse, chose McKinsey over Hindustan Lever. But I've had a lot of respect both for Ponds growing up in Chennai and then also Hindustan Lever as I went through a business school and beyond. So very honored to be having this conversation. The idea of this book started about 3 years ago. I'm the dean of our McKinsey's Bauer Forum, and we were getting to a point where we knew we would have more than 500 CEOs who would have gone through the Bauer Forum. Now we've had more than 600, but 3 years ago we could see the trajectory. And we felt like we had a data set from which we could extract learnings and share those learnings with the world. Part of our objective here was to democratize the Bauer Forum itself. We've shared a lot about the process that we use. We've shared the stories of a small set of leaders who've gone through the Bauer Forum and leaders that we've observed. I've observed over the last 30 years, my colleagues have observed over the last several decades. And we've also extracted a set of what we call micro practices. I'm sure we'll talk about that. And a set of questions that can help leaders on their own journey. And leaders meaning not just CEOs or senior leaders, but really leaders across the whole spectrum who are thinking about leadership. I loved Mr. Balraman's framing already of manager versus leader. He was setting that up in his introductory remarks. And we felt, why not share these ideas on how leaders can invest in their own development, grow, and learn. Mahatma Gandhi had said, live every day like it's your last, and learn every day like you live forever. So it was really that learning orientation that inspired us to write the book and bring the ideas to the world, Atul.
So and that's fantastic to democratize, what you said, democratize leadership and learning, and I think that's a really great purpose. My question to you though is, what is it about human-centric leadership? And I know it's the whole book that sets it apart because if anyone is interested and you go to Amazon and type in the word leadership, I did this. There are only about 57,000 and change books or books basically that come up with a leadership title in them, leadership word in the title. So writing another one is a very brave venture, and kudos to you for doing that and doing it so well and making it to several best-selling lists. But what is it about human-centric leadership that sets it apart from these 57,000 other books?
Yeah, our big idea here is this concept of human-centric leadership, as you said. What we saw is in today's day and age, with all the geopolitics that are constantly changing and changing faster, you have technology that is disrupting the at least the business world, but also even beyond that, our day-to-day lives. Climate change is real and here to stay. So in this context, the idea that a leader has answers to all the problems that are happening in the world, we felt is no longer relevant. And so we thought what is important is for a leader to be able to ask questions. On the one hand, a leader still needs to have set a sense of purpose, a vision, a direction that can be useful to the organization, but at the same time, be open to asking the tough questions What am I not clear about today? Being humble, which is, our chapter one is you're not the smartest person in the room. Be able to assemble, use their sense of purpose to inspire teams and inspire institutions. So our thesis is you cannot walk around today just telling people what to do. You need to come in with a deep sense of your own purpose and use that to inspire teams and inspire institutions. So that's what we are calling inside out leadership. So, inside is, and half the book is on the inner journey. What is my purpose? Who am I? What gives me energy? And half the book is on using that clarity to inspire teams and inspire change in the world. And so that's the idea that we wanted to bring to the world, and that's the idea we saw in all these Bauer forums and the 600 leaders that we had the good fortune to observe and watch over the last 15 years, Atul.
So just let's dig into this whole, purpose and inspiration, because this is what we saw in ponds, as I said, in droves, and Balram referred to it as well. I've got to paint the picture a little bit. I know you were in India at that time, but perhaps not quite, because in the sense you were a younger, student in the years when cosmetics was deemed to be a luxury good, heavily taxed. We had growth objectives, but frankly, the way to grow was not very clear. And Mr. Narayanan had this uncanny ability to look beyond, look around corners and think about a world where India and Indians and ponds could be hugely successful. And he, as I said, instilled empathy in us, and I'll talk a little bit about maybe it's a good point to have a standard, the standard operating procedure was when we went out to meet a salesperson and we came back, if we ran into you in the hallways, the first question would be, how is so-and-so's son doing now? So if you hadn't picked that up when you went, to this on the sales visit, you would show up poorly. That's the level of empathy. The CEO of a company knowing every salesperson's family as deeply as he did. But the inspiration and the empowerment was he realized that the way to growth was to build these brands, but we would have to build multiple businesses. And there are several of us in the room that actually came up with ideas or found ideas as we traveled and were empowered to run with them. And, Balraman built the biggest of them, the leather business. But I remember really well, I was sent on a trip to Cheesebro Ponds and met with Bill Schmidt, who was our R&D leader at the other end. And he took me out for dinner and we're eating a Mexican meal and says, the mushrooms in this are grown in a factory situation. Do you think you could do that in India? And I said, I have no idea. I thought mushrooms were farms. So no, let's get on a plane tomorrow morning. And we flew to Temple, Pennsylvania, Reading, Pennsylvania, drove to Temple, saw this mushroom farm. And about a year later, we were in mushroom production for one of the food units of Cheesebro Ponds. That's the level of inspiration, empowerment. We were all, and there's a colleague of mine who did the same with the thermometer business, glass and mercury thermometers, with leather, as I said, and maybe Balraman can talk about that. But the whole idea was we did exports to Russia and the Soviet Union. And the whole idea here was find the opportunities, grow those opportunities, and use those surplus funds to build the businesses. So there was a clear purpose in this, and that purpose was make India strong, as I said, for God, for country, and for the institution. So when you hear of that, and you've met these 600 CEOs and more, does that, as I said, belong to the pages of your book? Does that kind of resonate with what you've seen?
It definitely resonates. This idea of, I think one of you mentioned the point yin and yang, or, we call it managing polarities in the book. What we saw in the leaders that we studied was this ability to, on the one hand, be humble and ask the tough questions, questions for which I don't have answers at this point, at the same time, be able to then set audacious goals, pursue opportunities that otherwise might feel very, very hard to pursue. So, or as you called it, being very empathetic and being demanding and setting expectations for people. So we saw in these leaders this incredible ability to manage polarities that we have called out. You mentioned Stefan Bansal of Moderna as he was going through the pandemic, and they had the idea that they could produce the vaccine back in 2020, in the first quarter of 2020. On the one hand, Stefan set some very audacious goals. He set a goal of manufacturing 1 billion doses of the vaccine at a time when they had not made a single dose of any product. They were a small biotech. And at the same time, he set that goal, and yet he was there. The question he asked his head of manufacturing was, how can I support you to make 1 billion doses? So he was always willing to roll up his sleeves, bring the right expertise, do what it takes, be collaborative, and make it clear that like we are in this together. It's not like I've set a goal for you and then I run away from the field. So a lot of these leaders, we saw an incredible ability to be there, be engaged, be problem solvers, be challengers, and yet be able to attract great people, empower them, allow them to make mistakes at some points, and unleash their full potential. So that's definitely one big theme as I'm hearing you talk about Mr. Narayanan and what we saw in many of the leaders that we studied as well, Atul.
That's terrific. The other one I picked up from your book a lot, and I'd like to hear from you, is about vulnerability. You want to just talk about that, and then I can come in with a rejoinder or example of what I witnessed in Mr. Narayanan's work.
Happy to, happy to. And there are two close cousins that we describe in the book, vulnerability and resilience. I feel like in today's day and age, resilience is so important, both at a personal level and then at an institutional level. But I'll start with vulnerability. I think the many stories of vulnerability that we have. One of the stories I want to bring out is that of Claire Babineau-Fontenot, who's the CEO of Feeding America. Again, I'll go back to the pandemic. And on the one hand, Claire was able to set a very audacious goal. She expected all the people, there are 200 food banks all across America. She realized that 50 million Americans were food insecure, much more than what the world understood. Frankly, that some of that problem still continues, even in a developed country like America. It's sometimes there's 14 million kids who are food insecure in the U.S. And so Claire set some very tough expectations for her team to be there, be with the people that they were serving, and at the same time, in the right setting with the right people. She was extremely vulnerable on questions for which she did not have the answer. How to design a supply chain that serves 50 million people, how to bring an experience for these people where they have less of shame or guilt, but they're actually comfortable accessing food from Feeding America or the food banks that they're part of. So designing an experience was quite important to be able to provide access to the right set of people. And these questions, she would be very, very open and not feel shy in the right setting with the right people, with the right team at the right time. So, we don't talk about vulnerability when you're in a crisis. You don't want to go in front of thousands of people and say that, you have lots of open questions. But at the same time, if you don't put those questions with your team or with the right set of people, you're not going to be able to have breakthrough answers and innovation. Again, another theme, Atul, I heard you talk about. So that's where we saw vulnerability, and vulnerability, if used rightly in the right setting, can actually be a source of strength, a source of influence. Even I'll go so far as to say a source of power. And that's what we saw. We saw, in the leaders that we studied, and this vulnerability then helped these leaders become more resilient, adapt to the changes that were happening, when something like COVID hits, or something like a big change in regulations, or geopolitics. We saw an incredible resilience, incredible versatility, another theme that we touch on in the book, both on the emotional side and on the intellectual side, that we saw in these leaders and these institutions, Atul.
Oh, that's a great point. And I remember as a young brand manager as brand manager for Pond's cold creams, we had the iconic opal glass jars that suddenly had to be phased out, and we were all obviously very concerned and feeling very threatened in some ways. But Mr. Narayanan was with me. We went into a meeting with our agency, with Alec Padamsi, another brilliant man of the era. And it was in a hotel room. There was just 4 or 5 of us, and identified the issues. There was supply chain issues, manufacturing issues, etc. But the real issue was the consumer perception that the heft is gone. I used to get something that, and how would we overcome that perception of heft? And the answer was plastic packaging with cardboard cartons, and actually it would, turned it into an advantage, turned a crisis into an advantage, which is what leaders typically do. So lots of examples like that. But in the interest of time, I want to move us to some other things that I read in your book. And the micro practices, by the way, are fantastic. All of you should really get this book. And at the back of the book, there's some micro practices, which I love because it's things everyone can implement. But I want to go to, what did you find in terms of blind spots? Where do you think, because every great leader still has some, and what is it that typically, is there a pattern, and is there something we can all as leaders prepare for?
Yeah, I think the biggest blind spot we unearthed, or we saw in the journey of these leaders, is people don't often bring truth to these leaders, and there's a scarcity of truth telling, especially as you get more senior. Nobody wants to come and tell you the truth, and in a weird way, you can actually feel quite lonely, despite leading an organization that has hundreds of thousands of people. We saw the loneliness, and we saw the lack of truth telling. And so one of the chapters we have in the book is encourage a cadre, a spirit of truth telling in the organization. The story we have is that of a media company CEO. He came from the finance background. He was a very successful CFO, and then was made the CEO. And he describes it quite openly. He was always focused on numbers, and holding people accountable to performance. And with that mindset, quite often people didn't come and tell him what was really going on with customers, what were readers saying about the media company audience, what was the audience really telling them. And so he set up a network across the institution. And also, he would travel a lot, and had to change his own personality, because he realized that his style, his personality, his presence was actually coming in the way of truth telling. And the more, if he wanted to encourage that truth telling, he had to change his own style to ask more questions. Of course, he still held people accountable to performance, but he would not lead with that. He would lead with much more understanding audience, understanding the employees, and then get to performance afterwards. And that shift allowed him to understand the business a lot more, but also get this culture of truth telling a lot more in the organization. And that ties back to some of the micro practices that we have. Again, like you said, we have lots of them, but one that I like a lot is, as a leader, how can I be the last one to speak? So when I go to a team and a team is solving a problem, If I start by giving my answer first, immediately I'll shut down dialogue and shut down problem solving in the team. If I come in with a spirit of listening, of course, if there's a values issue or something, integrity issue, I need to speak up and call somebody out. Of course, I should do that as a leader. But when the team is genuinely problem solving, understanding the customer, or working through some design issue, how can I be the last one to speak so that I'm listening to everybody's voices, everybody feels heard. And then, of course, I'm synthesizing. I do, if needed, if the team hasn't been able to come to an answer, as a leader, I have to set that direction. I might have to break be a tiebreaker at some point, but really hold on to my peace and wait till I've heard all the voices, and that then encourages truth telling. At McKinsey, we use the term obligation to dissent, where we expect every person if they disagree, to speak up. And the only way that will happen is if I, as a leader, encourage that in the team and in the broader system, Atul. That's one micro practice that then ties back to this blind spot around lack of truth telling.
And that's a great and a simple one to implement. Every one of us can implement that, even with our own children, right? Listen to them first before giving them our opinion on what needs to be done. But back to the flaw of not taking truth to power, I believe, and I'm going to submit, that represents a lack of character. And that's one of the things that we Narayanan stood for. And, our company slogan was a culture of character and competence. So if you have character, and I've had the fortune of working for people like Ross Perot, character is integrity. It's what you do when no one is watching, right? That's the classic definition of character. So if you are priding yourself of Satyamev Jayate and, truth always, then why would you not speak the truth here? What it really means is there is something missing. So I don't know if that's going out on a limb too far, but I would say when there isn't a truth to power, then there is perhaps lack of character.
No, I agree with you. I think character is a theme that we chose not to make that explicit in the book, but completely agree with you on leading in a culture of character and competence. That resonates a lot with me. Character is a very close cousin of many of the dimensions that we touch on the book as well. And in fact, even after the book, we have just published an article. We call it Creating a Leadership Factory in the 21st Century, where we've learned a lot from the US Navy SEALs and many other institutions, not just in the business world. And even in the book, we have Admiral Eric Olson, who spent 40 years with the U.S. Navy, and a lot of these armed forces. I know it's true of the Indian armed forces as well. They are great leadership factories for inculcating leadership skills, and they hold character, and it's a great system to test character, and they've defined it, they've described it, and often you make mistakes. Eric was the operational commander of the Osama bin Laden operation. He was not on the ground, but he was in DC advising the president, and he had to make a decision when the helicopter went down because they had made some mistakes in the calculation of the compound wall. They had to make a decision within a couple of minutes. He had to make his recommendation, and that comes down to all the training. It comes down to his own judgment, his understanding of everybody in the team, and then being able to quickly, even in a hierarchical system, being able to listen to the voices on the ground, what they were saying, and come to a decision very, very quickly. And that absolutely needs character and competence, as you're talking about, and also an ability to judge the character of all the people who are then giving him input to be able to make a call so quickly. And I do think it's a topic, even so many decades later. I think a topic to be studied more, to be researched more, to be understood more, to be learnt more. So very much agree with you, Atul.